My name is Jessica Miller, and I never imagined something as ordinary as sitting in the back seat of a car would change the way I looked at my life, my family, and the people around me. It wasn't a dramatic movie scene or a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. It was just one small moment, one tiny choice, that became the turning point for everything that followed. It was a chilly autumn morning in Ohio. The leaves had already begun to fall, painting the streets in shades of gold and red. I was running late for work, which wasn't unusual for me, but what made that day different was that my car refused to start. I tried 3 times to turn the ignition, but it only made that awful clicking noise that sends a shiver down your spine when you know the engine isn't going to cooperate. Frustrated, I called my brother, David, who lived just a few blocks away. "Jess, I can swing by and pick you up," he said without hesitation. That was David, always dependable, always ready to help. He told me he was already giving his friend Michael a ride to the office downtown, so there would be 3 of us in the car. When he pulled up, I saw Michael already sitting in the passenger seat, his briefcase resting on his lap. David gave me an apologetic look through the window as if to say, "Sorry, front seat's taken." Normally, I'd insist on sitting in the front, especially since I was a sister, but something about the way Michael was already settled in made me just shrug it off. Without complaint, I opened the back door and slid in. I didn't know then how important that decision would be. The car ride started off like any other. The radio was playing soft rock, David was chatting about his latest project at work, and Michael occasionally added a comment here and there. I sat quietly, staring out the window, trying to mentally prepare for the long day ahead. But as the car merged onto the highway, I found myself observing Michael. I had seen him around a few times before, but we'd never really talked. He had a calm presence about him, the kind of person who doesn't need to raise his voice to be noticed. At one point, I dropped my phone between the seat and the door. As I leaned down to grab it, I caught sight of Michael glancing at me through the rearview mirror. Not in a strange or uncomfortable way, but in a thoughtful, almost curious manner. It was the kind of glance that made you feel seen, like someone was actually paying attention when most people wouldn't bother. The ride continued, and eventually, Michael turned slightly in his seat to ask me a question. "So, Jessica, what do you do?" It wasn't a casual, polite question. His tone carried genuine interest. I told him I worked as a graphic designer for a small firm, and, to my surprise, he seemed fascinated. "That's really creative," he said. "I've always admired people who can take an idea and make it visual." From there, the conversation began to flow. I hadn't planned on talking much during the ride, but Michael had this way of asking questions that made me want to open up. Before long, we were discussing books, movies, and even our favorite childhood memories. David joked from the driver's seat that he felt like a chauffeur for 2 people who had just met but already had a million things to talk about. When David finally dropped me off at my office, I felt strangely energized. The day that had started with frustration and a dead car battery suddenly didn't feel so bad anymore. I couldn't explain why, but that short conversation in the back seat stayed with me. The following week, my car was still giving me trouble, so David offered me more rides. Each time, Michael was there, sitting in the passenger seat. And each time, I climbed into the back. What started as small talk turned into longer, deeper conversations. I learned that Michael was an architect, passionate about designing buildings that didn't just look good but also serve the people inside them. He talked about his dreams of starting his own firm one day, and I found myself inspired by his ambition. Sometimes, he would turn halfway around in his seat, so he could see me better as we talked, and I started to notice little things about him. The way his eyes lit up when he spoke about something he loved, the quiet confidence in his voice, the kindness in how he listened. It was in those back-seat conversations that I began to realize something important about myself. For a long time, I had been moving through life on autopilot. My job was fine, my friendships were steady, but I hadn't felt truly excited or inspired about anything in years. Sitting in that back seat, talking to someone who was so alive with passion and purpose, reminded me of what it felt like to actually feel. One Friday evening, after work, David suggested we all grab dinner. The 3 of us ended up at a little diner not far from downtown. That was the first time I really saw Michael outside the context of our morning rides. He was relaxed, funny, and full of stories. At one point, he leaned across the table and asked me, Jessica, have you ever thought about doing freelance design work? You're so creative. It seems like you could have your own clients. No one had ever suggested that to me before. The idea had crossed my mind in fleeting moments, but I'd always dismissed it as unrealistic. Yet, when Michael said it, I found myself believing it was possible. That night, as David dropped me off, I caught myself wishing I could stay just a little longer. And when I walked into my quiet apartment, I realized that the back seat had given me more than just a ride. It had given me perspective. It had introduced me to someone who saw me in a way I hadn't seen myself in years.